Here we are. Here we are. Sounds a little
Yay.
different. No, it doesn't. Okay. We're live. So here we
Beautiful.
are. I know we don't have any guests here yet because we have another minute or two to go, but I want to just introduce you now to anybody that'll be watching after the fact. I'm Julie Daly, and I'm from Unabashedly Female, and this is my first live Google Hangout, and I can't think of a better person to be doing this with. Amy Palko. You can see her down there in the little screen in the bottom. She is, I don't even know what superlatives to use. She's just a really beautiful woman. And I've known Amy for maybe 5 years online, we met.
Yeah.
Amy's in Edinburgh. And she's the creatrix of Red Thread Voices. And we'll find out more of what Red Thread Voices is about. It's a publishing house that aims to offer a home to the voice of the exiled feminine. She's also a goddess guide, a poet, photographer, and lecturer whose work has been featured internationally. She has a PhD. She lives in Edinburgh, Scotland, with her husband and 3 teenage children in their home that overlooks the deep harbor and the wide mouth of the River Forth as it opens up to swallow the cold waters of the North Sea. And I wanted to read that because it gives you just a little entry into the power Amy has to string words together.
Oh, thank you. This evening I've been looking out at the water outside my window, and it's been such an unusual weather pattern coming through. So right out at the horizon, we keep getting these small fragments of rainbows appearing, and it's just been completely stunning.
Oh.
So, and I had one of those moments where I thought, I get to live here? I get to live this life?
Wow.
So
I want to visit there someday.
yeah, I want you to visit here someday.
Amy's visited in California, and I got to see her here, so soon that'll have to happen. So we are waiting for guests to come and join us. But let's start with telling a little bit about the main reason we're here is your newly released ebook of poetry from Revolutionary Lips. And it is a revolution.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. It has felt quite something to get it out into the world.
Yeah.
You know, it really took a lot of energy actually to birth it. It is the first publication to come out of the publishing house Red Thread Voices. And that's been a steep learning curve. It's like kind of throwing myself in the water and then going, oh, you mean I have to swim as well?
Well, that makes sense. I know you talk about the descent, right? So
yeah,
interesting, the water and thinking about going underneath and being submersed.
Yeah. Oh, there's that amazing poem by Stevie Smith, Waving Not Drowning. I think I was possibly drowning, not waving.
So now you're
but now I'm finally swimming, and I've finally managed to get this publication out and into the world. And it was so fascinating because so much of the process that I kind of had to step up and really meet was actually releasing these poems. And these poems are intensely intimate and personal pieces. So allowing myself to give myself permission to release these poems and to share them with the world at large was actually so much a part of the process of getting these poems into a published form.
Well, I'm so glad we're starting there because I think, you know, for anybody watching, and I know that so many of the women we know and the women we work with on some level have explored writing, you know, not only for their personal self-exploration, but also are contemplating putting books out into the world. And there can be this great fear of that. So to be really transparent, it's lovely for you to talk about the part between finishing the poems and then actually having the world see them.
Yeah, because there's a big difference between, just writing these poems in your journal, you always use red pens. Because I tell myself, my writing is meant to be read.
That's great.
So even in my journals, my writing is meant to be read. And that sounds silly, but it's actually really changed. It's really changed my mentality around bringing my work out and
fascinating.
Yeah. So yeah, it really has been quite something to take these poems from a journal place and to fashion them, actually, to go through a crafting process, to put them through that kind of editing process, and then creating like safe containers for this work to be birthed. I think that's actually really, really important, particularly when our writing is so profoundly personal, that we create spaces for us to fully expand into what it is that we've written. So with Revolutionary Lips, I sent it out to one other person and went, here it is. And then I sent it out to a few more and went, written some poems. And then I sent it out to a few more and went, here's some poems. Until it got to the point where I was like, I'm actually feeling like I'm ready to bring this to a bigger audience. I'm actually feeling like I'm more prepared now to let this go, because I feel like I have enough validity, or there's been enough validation, within me in order to release these.
Well, it's interesting because you said that about, and I didn't write it down, but creating space, or creating space within yourself. Your hands were like this. And then as you were talking about the space being created, you kept doing this, right? So I love you talking about that, because in the process of you doing what you needed to do for your own, my word would be sanity. I don't know what your word would be, right? In this process of unveiling yourself, that it actually, by sharing it with your sisters, I don't know if some of them were men as well, that your capacity to hold the unknown of what what you were going to experience grew.
Yeah, it absolutely did. And what that spaciousness allowed me to do as well was to get out of my own way, and actually to get out of the way of the poems. To stop seeing them as solely intimate sharings of my heart, and actually start to see them as almost having a life of their own. Is that these poems want to get out and meet themselves in the world, in the hearts and minds of the women that are reading it.
Yeah.
And that's what they want to do. I know that's what they want to do. And so I have to be able to, give them the space to live. I have to give them that sort of autonomy. And as any good, strong mother would do, is just kind of really bolster them and give them that lift that they need in order to move them out into the world. And I couldn't do that while I was still so strongly and viscerally connected to these poems and the meanings of them.
Right. So
sharing them with sisters and having them come back and say, oh, I loved this poem, and this is what it spoke to me, and this is how I read it, and realizing actually that they've got a completely different relationship with the poem. And then that created more space as well for me to go, yeah, that's really beautiful. I love that you have this independent relationship with this poem.
Yeah. That's really beautiful, and I love that we're also showing that we get to make the choices on how we begin to let our children be free, right? We get to do the things that support us, because sometimes there can be this feeling, well, now I have this thing and I'm going to put it out into the world, and suddenly I lose complete control of it. But it can be a gradual process.
Exactly. And like I said, I think we create a series almost of safe, sacred spaces for our work to grow in, A lot of people are all about, moving outside of their comfort zone because that's where the magic happens. And we tend to forget actually that a lot of growth happens inside a comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think
Beautiful.
of it as being the first comfort zone? Do you know? It's where everything happens. Do you know? It's where we're conceived. It's where we gestate. It's where we come into our fullness, and then we're ready to move out and into the world. And if we were to bypass that comfort zone too soon, then there wouldn't be a birth. There wouldn't be these poems out in the world.
Yeah.
So it was really important for me to kind of honor that process, for myself as much as for the poems themselves.
And it seems like it's the same way you raise a child in a healthy way, right? When the mother gives it initially the really strong roots to the earth, a sense of belonging, a sense of community, a sense of having the right to be here and take up space, and the autonomy, and then you begin to
Yeah.
move out into the world as an older being. Can you
Yeah.
share a little bit about the revolution part of this, from revolutionary lips?
Mm. Yeah. Well, the revolution has been fascinating because it's something which yeah, absolutely has a life of its own. But for me, the very sort of personal revolution piece is love. And that sounds very corny.
Not to me.
but it's actually radical self-acceptance. It's being able to look into those very dark, shadowy places within the psyche and going, actually, that's mine too. And it's just as worthy of respect and honouring and integration as those bright, sparkly, shiny, beautiful places in our psyche that we like to show off to other people.
Yeah.
So being able to welcome back all of the self in all its quite edgy glory has felt like the revolution. Because if I can authentically mirror that back to women, then I feel it almost gives them permission. It gives them permission to start accepting what they've been told up to this point is unacceptable in themselves.
Yes. Yeah. That was one thing I was thinking about reading this for. I think the fourth time reading your poems was this mirroring, and you and I have talked about it. But the fact that we're really walking each other home, as Ram Dass said, as women, that is such a critical part of this mirroring, and how when we shine the light on something within us and we have the courage to share it, that then other women go, oh, I know that place in myself.
Yes, absolutely. I think authentic mirroring is so lacking, actually, in our contemporary culture. In our mass media, we are not seeing ourselves reflected back to us. Instead, what we're getting are these very kind of distorted, manipulated images of and expressions of femininity. So I think it then becomes even more important that on an individual basis and in the media that we are ourselves creating and putting out there, that we're being as authentic as we possibly can. And yes, that's a very vulnerable place to be because it's counterculture.
It's counterculture, exactly. Right. And one of the things that I've been seeing lately is that when you begin to see something in yourself that hasn't been expressed yet by any other woman that you're in contact with,
yeah,
you're the first.
Yeah.
Right? There is no mirror yet. And that's part of what I think leadership right now in the world for women is. It's bringing back those facets of the feminine that you don't see anywhere and that you haven't seen anybody else mirror. And sometimes we wait for that mirroring before we then find the courage to share it. But to really step up and say, I know this is true as my experience. I know it's true, so I must be the first to share this facet of woman.
Yeah.
And I think that, to me, in reading your poems, you're really stepping out in that way.
Yeah, and it feels very scary. It does feel very scary, but then, like I said, by going through that process of sharing it with other women and other women going,
Yeah.
I feel that way too, or I've had that moment in the kitchen. when when you just kind of get, you have these kind of moments where, and it's just within the chaos of like an everyday ordinary moment. And there's just something present there, and it's not something that we discuss, it's not something we explore, it's something to be suppressed. It's another dark aspect that isn't acceptable in our representations of femininity in our everyday lives.
And that's one of the things I love about what you've written too, because it doesn't take place out in the world in some grand capacity. It takes place in your kitchen and in your bedroom, right? In your nest, in the cycles of your life. All the things of the feminine that aren't ever raised up to a place of value that are so rich and so important in our human lives.
Yeah, because I think it's actually a realm that's been really misaligned. Actually, if you want to write grand literature, you need to go out and have an adventure. You need to go outside of the home. You need to go. It's the whole hero's journey. You need to leave home in order to have the journey. And actually, I've been exploring this more and more and more about, well, what would the journey be like if instead of turning outside, we turned within. And I think that's partially why my settings are in the home. Mm-hmm. So it's the attic, it's the kitchen, it's the bedroom, and the language is an embodied language. So it's a visceral piece. It's an invitation into a felt and lived experience of what femininity is in this moment, in this particular instance, which might resonate with others.
Beautiful. So in the poem titled Lilith,
mm-hmm.
which is one of my favorites because it's so clear and to the point, you speak about her leaving, and in her leaving she gives us permission to do so as well. Can you a little bit more about what it looks like to you, or what you sense it looks like for us as women to leave together?
Well, I mean, Lilith Left, I find, is such a, like you say, it's such a concise and such a to-the-point piece. Lilith left, and she said no, and she invites us to do the same, and there's no maps, there's no choreography to follow. There's that invitation into stepping into a new paradigm. And for me, that new paradigm is very much around not compromising our desire. Lilith for me has always been a goddess who knew the quality and the validity of her own desire, and so was unwilling to compromise that. And rather than compromise it, left altogether. And that's profoundly radical for women. So many of our desires, we are told we're not allowed, or are not okay, or they're too much. If we're too much in various different ways, or sometimes that our desires are not enough, and they're belittled in some sort of way. And so when we have all of this conditioning and sort of set of behavioural practices around our desire, it begins to get suppressed altogether. So when you ask a woman, what does she want? What do you desire? Invariably, women really struggle to form a response to that question.
Yeah, I know.
It's about unearthing that, about reclaiming it, and then actually saying, you know what, I'm not necessarily willing to compromise around that desire piece because that's what I want, and it's okay to want what you want.
So you spoke of Lilith and the quality. She knew the quality of her desire. Can you speak about the quality, or I sense you're talking about how it feels to desire?
Yeah, I mean, certainly for me, desire is a very embodied piece, and I can think of it in terms of sexual desire and how that feels. And I can also feel that real yearning for something different, or a yearning to produce something creative, and for me it's always kind of in this, I'm sort of rubbing my belly, it's kind of
Yeah, I can start
like
to feel it, dude.
you know, in that sort of sacral solar plexus kind of area, you know, that and which is so fascinating, because of course if that's where if that's where my desire lives, you know, certainly the narratives that I receive from media is that bellies need to be eradicated, and you know, you have to suck it in, or you have to buy special pants that special knickers that make sure that your belly is squashed, you know, and as small as possible, because you know your belly's, you know, not respectable somehow, or it's not attractive. And yet, if that's where I feel like my desire lives, then how liberating would that be to reconfigure the narrative around the belly?
Yeah, completely.
Yeah, yeah. So that feels quite revolutionary too.
It does too. I mean, you know, I'm thinking of all those ads on the side of, I don't know, sites and stuff, you know, flat abs, you know, it's like, smush that desire, get it flat, get it tight, you know.
Exactly. And what's fascinating about that too is that it's the whole idea behind making a smaller belly, or if you don't have a small belly, not showing it, you know, because the whole bikini body piece, is to be desirable, you know. So it's not for you to be the desiring subject, it's for you to be the desirable object.
Oh, ding, 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 ding. That's like a really, could you repeat that?
Yeah, it's the piece around wanting the belly to be smaller is to be a desirable object, not a desiring subject. And for a woman to transition into wanting more than being wanted is, yeah, that feels like, you know, I keep saying that feels revolutionary, but that these revolutions just keep unfolding.
You and I have had that discussion before, right? We've both done writing around something more than being wanted. And
Yeah.
I think that that is such a huge piece of this conversation, is becoming, you know, becoming the subject of our own lives again.
Yeah. So that we're not, you know, at the whim of somebody else's decisions, or at the whim of our own conditioning. You know, what we're being told it's okay to want, and being told which is to be wanted. You know, and really any other kind of desires that you might then express are somehow not okay. And really disrupting that narrative so that we can actually start to integrate desire, and not feel as though by doing so that there's going to necessarily be a huge disruption in your life, or that everything's going to fall apart. You know, but there's actually a way of managing desire and still managing relationship, or the desire to be in relationship.
Yeah, you know, I think that the whole concept of women's wildness is, you know, it's there can be a fear of that wildness, which is actually probably what makes it feel so big, rather than the wildness itself feeling very natural, a natural instinctive part of who we are as human beings, and as of female human beings.
Yeah.
I
think feminism has been terrifying, you know, for you know, the society at large. You know, a woman in her wildness. Yeah, terrifying.
But when you really feel it, it's not as terrifying as you thought it was.
Exactly.
It feels very natural. Exactly. I mean, it's powerful, but it doesn't feel unnatural, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it puts the woman back into touch, I think, with with her own soul, actually. And it puts her back in touch with her embodied soul. And to do that is actually the kernel. It's what sits at the heart of true feminine empowerment. And there's a lot of vested interests which are not that keen on feminine empowerment, you know, and see that as a dangerous thing and want to disrupt it in whatever way they can.
Yes.
Again, why it's so important that we speak with this wild woman's voice, and we give her a platform to be amplified in the world.
You know, it just made me realize something, and I want to ask you about poetry and about writing. You and I have talked about writing raw, which is something that I offer for women, just finishing up the first round of that, and it's really a way to access the deep interior part of oneself, to see what actually lives in there outside of the conditioned part of us.
Mm.
And I'm curious about your process of writing. You know, if you were looking at writing these poems, this work as a body of work, and you looked at the process that you actually went through from when it first started in you, when the seed first sprouted, to this point, what can you say about how to go inside and access these parts that are outside of the conditioning of these other vested interests that don't want us to go there?
Yeah. Honestly, for me, it's about writing about what's present right now. And what my process tends to be is that I check in with my body. You know, I think that the body, the body tends to be quite an unruly subject. It doesn't tend to behave itself, and so it's always a good starting place, actually, when you're exploring writing from the position of the exiled feminine, because the body gets exiled in so many different ways, and we're taught in our educational systems to move up into our heads and to try and ignore the body as best we can. So really inviting our writing practices to re-engage with the embodiment, the practice of embodiment. So some of the poems themselves have been written as a result of some workshops, not writing workshops, various different. So I went to a wonderful workshop on the descent, which explored through the myth of Inanna with Kathleen Prophet. So some of the poems came through that. I was part of a workshop. I co-hosted a workshop on Lilith, and so some poems came through that. I was participating in a year-long monthly yin tent, which was exploring alchemical chocolate. So some of the poems were coming through from that practice. But sometimes they would just kind of bubble up out of nowhere. And I mean, the very first poem that I wrote from this collection isn't the first poem. The first poem is The Golem She. And it started because I saw a piece of graffiti spray painted on a bridge in a street in Edinburgh, and it said, "Eat rich." And I was like, oh, that's really weird. You know, what a weird phrase. Yeah. And so I quickly got my notepad and thought, I have to write that down. And I wrote "Eat the Rich," and then this whole poem spiraled out onto. And it was the voice of the exiled feminine. And that poem terrified me. I mean, I wrote that poem maybe 4 years ago. Wow. And it stayed in a journal, and I put it aside because it terrified me. And I thought, where on earth did that come from? And please don't give me any more of that, because that's scary stuff. But it was absolutely the seed. It's the seed that germinated and that then followed.
And it really points out that the exiled feminine, obviously, we've exiled her as well. So that initial reaction, right, when we write things like that, when they come out of us, it's like, holy cow, I didn't just write that, did I? Oh, that's not me.
And of course, we have that whole piece as well of like, what would my children say if they read that? Or what would my parents say if they read that? Or I can't show that to my husband. Do you know? So those intimate relationships that we have, we hold them in a very, very contained sphere of conditioning. So certain things are okay to talk about, and certain things are not okay to talk about. Or it's okay to be this way, but you can't be that way. And so this exiled feminine voice, when it starts to speak through our creative writing, or through our art, or through our work, or however she starts to show up, she does feel like a disruptive force.
Yeah, very
and
much
that's
so.
not a comfortable place to sit.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, going back to your, idea of mirroring, that's why the mirroring is so important. Right?
Yeah.
If we talk about these things with each other, I know in our Writing Raw circle, those things come up and we just read it. And then it's like, wow, okay. It becomes much more a part of the fabric of who you are. I'm not set aside.
Exactly, because in actual fact, she doesn't necessarily become a horrible, destructive force in our lives that's just going to come in and create havoc. Actually, just sort of paying attention to her means that she doesn't necessarily do that, because we can invite her into the conversation. We can actually draw her in, and we can start to make conscious choices, within that engagement, rather than forcing her underground. So then she has to present in all of these other ways when we're just like going, oh, I don't know why I said that. Why did I do that?
Or I'm saying something and I got a whole different look on my face and body language, right?
Exactly, because there's something else going on entirely. Or we have those kind of moments, where we're just kind of going about our day, and I think when we would say, we take a mad turn, and we do something totally crazy and we're like going, I have no idea why I just did that. None at all.
And that's what I love about writing and poetry, and the whole, taking sort of the whole box off of the poetry word and going, what? Who knows what poetry is? Yeah. Poetry doesn't have to be what anybody says it is. I mean, to me, that's the raw piece of it is you just let it come out. It's going to have its own cadence. It's going to have its own rhythm. It's going to have its own beauty. It's going to have its own song. It knows it. It comes out as a like you said, as a something complete unto itself. And to know that, it helps us trust, I think, as writers.
And we have so much baggage around poems and poetry and poets, So we have so if you think of the word poet, you're probably thinking of a Wordsworth character, or you're thinking of Milton, or you're thinking of Yeats, or you're thinking of, any number of male poets that have been sanctioned by the Academy. What you're probably not thinking of is of yourself.
Right, that's right.
You're probably just not. And yet, and I had this is a piece that I really worked when I brought out Hymns to the Bliss Body, which was the first collection of poetry that I ever released. Except I didn't call it poetry. I was just like, oh no, I can't call these poems because then somebody might think I'm a poet, and that would be.
And then what would happen?
I know. Civilization might crumble. No. So then it became sort of almost, I was calling them prose poems. Almost like by putting the word prose in front of it, I was like kind of going, yeah, so I'm not like a real poet. I'm not telling you like I'm a real poet. I'm just like, I've written these words, which you might interpret as poems, or you might not. It's totally up to you.
Well, now you are a poet.
Yeah. Now I've fully stepped into it. I'm like going, these are poems. You couldn't look at them on the page and read them and hear them and not know they were poems. So as the author of those, that would make me a poet.
And after I think that everybody's a poet. Right? It's to me, it's like the idea that the source of our creativity is inside, right? It's in the body. It's in that deep interior space. And once you start to trust that source, then it just comes out. It flows, and it's And then the next step is obviously to put it in the world, like you have. So it takes courage.
Yeah, and I wanted to speak to that just very briefly about the putting it out into the world, because I think the way that I have arranged from Revolutionary Lips to get out into the world was really along the lines of that phrase of "it takes a village," So even going back to the idea of this being like this work being like a child that's being birthed and raised in the world. So I have gathered some of the women that I admire most in the world and said to them, will you help me raise this child? Will you help me to birth this revolution? And by doing that through this book blog tour, which you're so kindly hosting. And so that for me feels like an invitation, actually. I hope that other women see this as a way of getting their art and out into the world, and know that there are circles of women that will support you, that you can actually go out and speak to other women and say, you know, this is what I'm doing, this is what the work is. It feels really important to me to get this out into the world. Will you help me?
Yeah.
And my experience was that virtually every single person out of the list of 20 said yes.
Wow.
I think in the first instance I had 18 women. I had 18 yeses out of the list, which is huge.
It is, and it's really what it's going to take for us to all leave like Lilith did together. We have to leave together.
Yeah.
We have to leave supporting each other, even if we don't necessarily agree. You know, we still have to support each other. I think I'm so glad you brought that up as a way to conclude our interview.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
also,
now I know. Tell us a little bit about how everybody can purchase the book.
Sure. You can go to Red Thread Voices, which is redthreadvoices.com, and you will find the link there. Red Thread Voices is the publishing company that I set up earlier this year with the express idea of amplifying the wild woman's howl, and From Revolutionary Lips is the first publication to come out of Red Thread Voices. So it's easy to find on the website.
It's beautiful. And for a minute, can you share with us what your plan is for Red Thread Voices?
Yeah, definitely. Well, looking into 2015, what I would really like to do is I've already started working on another collection, so I've started to bring together more of my own work. But what I would also really like to do is extend it to other women as well. So that's the plan, is that we start to bring on other publications. It's been so interesting, you know, getting this first publication out, and now that I've done it the first time, it's, you know, I've had my learning curve. And I know that I'm not yet finished on that learning curve. I know there's still bits and pieces to go. For example, we'd love to bring out From Revolutionary Lips as a hard copy that you could purchase. So that's the next piece.
That's good to know.
Yeah, well, I think these poems need to be held in hands.
Yeah.
So, and there's a couple of other ideas for very limited editions of From Revolutionary Lips as well. But moving into the future with new publications, I would love it to be a mixture of my own work and other women's work as well.
Beautiful. And then you can also find, you have a goddess guidance group as well.
I do, which you'll find at amypalko.com.
Great. And other things that you offer there as well. Your Practical Magic Business Circle.
Yeah, my Practical Magic Business Circle, which will be running again in March.
Good, okay. Which I've experienced and is fantastic.
Yeah, I've so enjoyed doing that. I think, again, you know, it feels quite revolutionary, because what we're doing there is not so much a business, it's not a business course.
Yeah.
It's very much a circle. It's like a business retreat. So every woman that goes into that space gets something different out of it, and that feels like quite a different way of running something concerned with online businesses.
Absolutely, it's very different. It's very different, and it's very helpful.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So thank you again. I'm Julie Daly. If you want to know more about Writing Raw, you can visit my website at unabashedlyfemale.com. It's a space to enter into writing like this. So thank you, Amy. It's a pleasure. I'm so excited about this being in the world, and for women to share it with other women and the men they know that love this kind of work. So.
Yeah. definitely.
Okay.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Madame.
Okay. Bye, sweetie.
Bye.